The sky was too blue for a funeral. Caleb Mercer stood still in his tailored Navy suit, the same one he wore to pitch corporate HVAC systems to high-rise clients, now somehow too sharp for a graveside farewell. Wind stirred the edges of his black tie, teasing against the polished wood of the coffin below. The preacher's words drifted past him in soft, respectful tones, but they didn't land. She was really gone. Lorraine Mercer, his mother, his compass, his critic, and most recently his greatest mystery, had passed in her sleep just 5 days earlier. No long illness, no dramatic ending. Just a cold morning, an unanswered phone call, and then silence. People moved like polite shadows around him. The church ladies hugged him gently. A few of her neighbors in Charlotte offered casseroles condolences and whispered prayers. Tommy, his 10-year-old son, clung to his hand, not from grief but from confusion. He didn't cry. Caleb hadn't either. He couldn't. He watched as the casket lowered slowly into the red North Carolina clay, and thought, why did she never want to go home? Caleb hadn't seen the old farm since he was a teenager. His mom had been firm. That land was behind them. Whenever he asked why she would brush it off with a brittle laugh, some places don't deserve remembering. But now she was gone, and she'd left a locked wooden box with his name on it hidden in the back of her bedroom closet, like a secret waiting for daylight. He opened it alone hours after the service in the quiet living room, with only the ticking mantel clock for company. Inside was a silver key, tarnished and oddly heavy in his hand, a folded map with a plot marked M. Hill, 35 acres, and a letter written in her hand, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I know you're angry. I only ask one thing. Don't go to the farm. Let sleeping roots lie. Please, Caleb. Let them lie. He read it 3 times. The words stayed flat on the page, but something behind them howled. Tommy found him sitting on the couch with the key in one hand and the letter in the other. Is that from Grandma? Yeah, Caleb said quietly. Why didn't she want us to go there? Tommy asked. Caleb looked at him. His son had Lorraine's same curious, too wise eyes. I don't know. Maybe it's time we found out. The drive to Rockvale, Tennessee took 4 hours and a lifetime. Caleb hadn't told anyone they were going, not even his assistant back in Charlotte. He just rescheduled meetings, packed a bag for the weekend, and let Tommy skip school. The boy barely noticed. He was too excited for the road trip and the promise of Dad's old hometown. The landscape changed as they crossed into the foothills. Highways gave way to winding roads and hand-painted signs. Fresh honey quilts, Jesus saves. Trees stood tall in silent rows, and the mountains began to press in like memories. Tommy pressed his face to the window. It's pretty here. It is, Caleb said. He wasn't lying, but the quiet felt too thick, like the land was holding its breath. Rockvale hadn't changed much. Main Street still had the same diner, the same gas station, the same peeling theater marquee advertising a movie that had already left most cities 2 weeks ago. But there was something calming about that sameness. Caleb slowed the car and turned onto Mercer Hollow Road, unmarked now, but etched into his memory. He drove until the gravel gave way to weeds, and the wooden gate appeared sagging on rusted hinges. The padlock was gone. Someone had removed it. He parked the car. Is this it? Tommy asked, hopping out and squinting at the wide stretch of overgrown field and the small house in the distance. Yeah, Caleb said. This is it. The old farmhouse stood like a question mark at the edge of a field that hadn't been tilled in decades. The porch sagged, but didn't collapse. The paint had peeled down to its bones. Still it stood. They walked toward it. Each step felt slower. He remembered running through this field with bare feet, chasing fireflies. He remembered the tire swing that had once hung from the big oak long since fallen. The front door creaked as he pushed it open. The air smelled of dust cedar and something faintly sweet. And everything inside was clean. Swept floors, a freshly folded quilt on the old couch, a vase of dried flowers. "Someone's been here," Caleb whispered. Tommy had already wandered toward the kitchen, opening drawers. "Dad, come look." In the center of the wooden kitchen table sat a single envelope, yellowed with age, his name printed neatly, Caleb. He opened it slowly. Inside was a page in Lorraine's careful script. "If you came anyway, I suppose I always knew you would. There are things I buried here, some in the ground, some in my heart. If you find them, know this, I loved you, even when I didn't know how to show it." Below the note was a date. March the 2nd, 1964. He didn't recognize it, but it was circled in red. Caleb folded the note and leaned against the counter, staring at the cracked linoleum. His chest ached in places grief hadn't reached. This wasn't just a farm. It was the lockbox of her life. And she had swallowed the key for years. What happened here, he asked aloud to no one and everyone. From the window he saw movement. A woman crossing the field next door holding a small basket. Her walk was confident, unhurried. She reached the fence and waved. Tommy waved back. "That's Miss Vega," he said. Caleb looked at him. "How do you know that I saw her name on the mailbox when we passed the goats?" Miss Vega climbed the fence with practiced ease and walked toward the porch. "You're Caleb, right?" she asked, voice kind, but direct. "I am. I figured. I saw your mama here sometimes. She'd sit on that porch and stare out like she was watching something only she could see." Marisol hesitated, then stepped closer. "I always thought she was guarding something." Caleb didn't answer. Marisol handed him the basket. "Some honey and cornbread. For you and the boy." He took it. "Thanks. She always said if you ever came back, you'd find what she left behind. But she never said what that was." Her eyes softened. "You look tired, Mr. Mercer." He nodded. She started to leave, but paused. "Watch the back pasture before sunset. That's when the quiet gets loud out here." And with that, she was gone. Caleb stood at the doorway, holding a basket of kindness and a note full of warning. The sun was starting to dip. Light spilled across the field in gold, and the wind stirred the porch swing gently. He had come looking for answers, but something told him the land wasn't done asking questions. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1. To let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The scent of honeysuckle drifted in through the open window as Caleb stood in the living room, unmoving long after the sound of Marisol Vega's boots had faded down the path. The farmhouse felt like a stage, frozen between scenes, empty, but not abandoned. It carried weight, as if the walls were listening. Tommy sat on the floor, flipping through an old photo album he'd found under the couch. Caleb should have stopped him. Instead, he watched from the doorway, stuck in a quiet current he didn't yet understand. "She looks different," Tommy said. Caleb walked over and looked down at the page. There was Lorraine, maybe in her early 20s, leaning against a weathered fence, laughing at someone just outside the frame. No makeup, no polished hair. A version of his mother he'd never known. Not the uptight, reserved woman who once told a 6-year-old Caleb to hush. "Now we don't need to dig up old bones?" Tommy traced her smile with his finger. Did she like living here? Caleb took a breath. "I don't know, buddy. I really don't." The silence between them thickened until the screen door creaked. "Hope I'm not interrupting." Marisol stood there again, leaning in with a curious glance. Her jeans were dusty, her braid loose over one shoulder, and there was something grounded in her like she belonged to the land in a way Caleb never had. He motioned her in. "No, it's all right. Come in." She stepped inside, wiping her boots on the mat. "I brought you this." She handed him a folded sheet of paper. "Town numbers. Plumber mechanic my cousin runs the general store. Cell service gets patchy out here, so if you need anything, just walk over." Caleb unfolded the list. "Thanks. That's generous of you," she shrugged. "You're Lorraine's boy. That counts for something." He looked up sharply. "Did you know her well?" Marisol paused. "Not well, but I saw her. Every few months she came by, always alone. Sat on that porch, never stayed long." "What did she do while she was here?" Caleb asked. Marisol hesitated. "Mostly just sat. Wrote sometimes. Walked the edge of the pasture. Talked to the air like she was waiting for someone to talk back." He nodded, unsure what to say. The image of his mother, silent and waiting, haunted him more than he expected. "I didn't mean to bother," Marisol said, starting to turn. "No, stay," Caleb said too quickly. Then softened his tone. "Sorry, it's just, I've got more questions than answers right now." She studied him a moment, then pulled out a chair and sat. "Welcome to Rockvale. We specialize in secrets." Caleb gave a dry laugh. "Is that on the welcome sign?" "Should be." Tommy looked up from the album. "Are you a farmer?" Marisol smiled. "Sort of. I run a small operation next door. Goats, bees, a few vegetables." "Bees?" Tommy's eyes lit up. "Want to see the hives sometime?" He nodded enthusiastically. She turned to Caleb. "If that's all right with you." He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." Marisol's eyes drifted to the bookshelf near the fireplace. "She left things here." "Yeah. It's like she never stopped living here in her head," Caleb said. "I didn't even know she kept the place." Marisol leaned back in the chair. "You ever been here before?" "Only once. I was maybe 12. She brought me here to grab some furniture after my grandfather passed. I remember her rushing me, wouldn't let me go outside, wouldn't say why." "You think something happened out there?" she asked gently. "I don't know," Caleb admitted. "But she made me swear we'd never come back. And yet, here you are." He folded his arms, gaze distant. "That letter she left me. It said not to come. But she also left a key. And this place is still standing. Part of me thinks she knew I wouldn't listen." Marisol studied him for a moment. "Sometimes people say no when they really want you to say yes. Just to see if you care enough to ask again." The sentence lingered in the room. Tommy tugged on Caleb's sleeve. "Can we stay here tonight?" "Please," Caleb glanced around. The place felt old but solid, familiar and foreign at once, a strange peace in the quiet. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, we can stay." Marisol stood. "I'll leave you to it then. You'll want to check the well pump before dark. Sometimes the pressure gets moody." "Thanks," Caleb said. "For everything." She moved to the door. "Oh, one more thing. If you find a green tin box anywhere, bring it to me. Why, it was mine. Your mom said she'd hold on to it. Never told me where she put it. What's in it?" Marisol smiled faintly. "Memories. The kind you forget until you touch them." With that, she stepped onto the porch and disappeared down the hill, leaving behind the soft creak of wood and the weight of new questions. Later that night, after Tommy fell asleep, curled under a quilt on the living room couch, Caleb sat at the small kitchen table with a single lamp on and the photo album open again. He sipped weak coffee and stared at a picture of Lorraine holding a baby that wasn't him. There was no date on the back, no name. He turned the page. Nothing. Just blank pages and a pressed daisy tucked into the spine. His mother had always been hard to read, like a book with whole chapters torn out. Now every room in this house whispered with her silence. A soft knock echoed from the porch. Caleb's breath caught. He rose, slowly opened the door. Nothing. No person. Just the breeze moving gently through the field. Then he noticed something different sitting on the porch swing. A notebook. Old leather cracked along the spine. He picked it up. No note, no explanation. Just a first page written in familiar script. If I could do it all over again, I would have told you everything the day you turned 13. But I was afraid. Afraid the truth would make you hate me. Afraid you'd leave like he did. He sat down slowly, notebook in hand. The porch swing creaked as he leaned back. Above him, stars blinked through the branches. Inside, his son dreamed peacefully. Outside, the past stirred. And the land, this stubborn, sacred, complicated land, was just beginning to speak. The morning sun came through the kitchen window, soft and low, throwing gold across the pine cabinets and cracked tile. Caleb stood barefoot, sipping coffee from a chipped mug that still smelled faintly of cinnamon. The notebook sat open on the table beside him. He hadn't read past the first page. Not yet. Tommy was still asleep in the next room, wrapped up in quilts that smelled like cedar and thyme. Caleb didn't want to wake him. Not yet. Let the boy stay in that quiet place a little longer, before the questions started. He flipped the page. The truth isn't just what happened. It's what we carry because of it. The words hit harder than he expected. Lorraine hadn't been one for poetry, but this felt like someone trying to bleed out regret in ink. He heard the soft crunch of gravel just beyond the porch. A car door, then a knock at the screen. Marisol. She stood there in work boots and a denim shirt sleeves rolled to her elbows, curls pinned loosely beneath a ball cap that said, Vega Family Farms. In one hand, she held a bundle of fresh-cut wildflowers. Morning, she said almost shyly. Morning. Caleb opened the door. You're up early. Chores start before the dew burns off. Thought I'd bring you these. For the table, and... She lifted a thermos. Real coffee. Yours tastes like regret and cardboard. Caleb smirked. Fair. He stepped aside, letting her in. She moved comfortably through the house like someone who had once known it well, even if she hadn't. She set the flowers in a mason jar by the window. You sleep all right? He hesitated. Not really. You ever find something you weren't ready for? Her eyes flicked to the notebook. You found it. I didn't even know I was looking. Marisol pulled out a chair. I don't mean to pry, but I knew your mom better than I thought, and worse than she wanted. Caleb sat across from her. She ever mentioned someone named Jonah Marisol blinked. That's not a name I've heard in a long time. He waited. She didn't speak right away. Then your mother had a friend. A long time ago? Before she married your dad? People said she got sick one summer and went away for a while. When she came back, she wasn't the same. Caleb leaned forward. You think she had a child I don't know? Her voice softened. But I think she lost something she couldn't talk about, and I think she came here to remember it, or to forget. He exhaled through his nose. The whole town just let it go. This isn't Charlotte. People here keep things to themselves. Pride's a stronger chain than truth in a place like Rockvale. He looked down at his coffee. I never knew her. Not really. Marisol nodded. Most of us only know the parts people let us see. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just thick with understanding. Marisol broke it gently. I know someone who might know more. Reverend James. He's been here longer than the road signs. Caleb lifted an eyebrow. Think he'd talk to me if you ask the right questions, maybe. She stood. I should get back. The goats don't milk themselves. As she walked toward the door, she paused. You still planning to stay a while? Caleb looked out the window at the overgrown fields. Longer than I thought. A flicker of something passed across her face. She nodded once, then left with a quiet goodbye. Touch 'em. That afternoon, Caleb took Tommy into town. The boy needed to stretch, and so did his father's mind. Rockvale's town center was a 2-stoplight loop of old brick storefronts, faded awnings, and front porches that served as both gossip posts and history books. They stopped at the general store, a dusty place with creaky floors run by a middle-aged man named Curtis, who seemed to know who Caleb was before he introduced himself. Lorraine's boy, Curtis, said, ringing up a bottle of dish soap and some crackers. Didn't think we'd see you here again. Caleb gave a polite smile. Didn't think I'd be back. Curtis leaned in slightly. A lot of folks thought Lorraine might have moved back here one day, but she never did. Kept to herself. Did she talk about the farm? Caleb asked. Curtis hesitated. Not much, but she paid to keep it up. Had someone mow the grass every few months. Never let it go to seed. Tommy tugged on his dad's sleeve. Can we get these? He held up a small bag of caramel popcorn. Caleb nodded. Sure, bud. As they left the store, Caleb caught a glimpse of a familiar name on a flyer taped to the bulletin board, Franklin Weller, candidate for county supervisor. The name sat heavy in his memory. Something from a conversation long ago. One of his mother's old arguments with his father, maybe. Something about land and money. He made a mental note. They drove past the church on the way home. It sat on a hill white clapboard steeple, slightly leaning. A sign out front read, Sunday service, 10 a.m. Truth is a seed, let it grow. Caleb slowed the car. You want to go in? Tommy asked. Not today, but his eyes lingered on the front steps. Someone had painted them fresh. That meant someone still cared. Back at the farmhouse, the sun was just beginning to slide behind the ridge. Caleb sat on the porch while Tommy played in the field, chasing butterflies with a stick and a bright imagination. He opened the notebook again. The next page read, His name was Jonah. I named him after the man who ran from what he was called to do. I thought I was giving him strength. But maybe I cursed him with my fear. Caleb closed the book, heart twisting. He didn't know who Jonah was yet. But he knew now this story wasn't just about his mother. It was about what she left unsaid. And who she left behind. A door creaked open behind him. Marisol's voice drifted from the edge of the yard. You've got company. Caleb turned. An older woman in her 70s stood beside Marisol. She wore a navy cardigan, a long cotton skirt, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. Esther Nolan, his aunt, his mother's sister. I heard you came back, she said. Voice calm but cautious. Didn't think you'd have the nerve to stay. Caleb stood slowly. I wasn't planning to. Plans change. Her gaze flicked to the porch swing, then the notebook in his hand. Has it started talking yet? She asked, nodding to the journal. It's not the words I'm worried about, he said. It's what's missing. Esther walked closer. Some things are missing for a reason. Caleb met her eyes. And some things are hidden because people were too scared to speak. A pause. Then she said, You're just like your father. He almost said something sharp. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he asked, Why didn't anyone ever tell me about Jonah? Esther blinked. The name landed like a dropped plate. She looked away. "You're not ready for that story. I'm not a kid anymore." "No," she said, stepping back. "But some stories still break grown men in half." And then she left. No hug, no goodbye, just another shadow cast across the truth. The wind picked up as the last light faded behind the hill. Caleb sat back down the journal in his lap, the stars just beginning to appear above the trees. The past had started speaking. But the people still alive. They were speaking in riddles. And the only way forward was through. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1. To let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The rain came soft and slow just before dawn, tapping the tin roof of the old farmhouse, like a memory easing its way back into the world. Caleb stood barefoot in the kitchen again, the same chipped mug in his hand, now warm with real coffee thanks to Marisol. The notebook was open beside him, but he hadn't touched it yet. He kept thinking about Esther's words the night before, how she looked at him like he was cracking open something that should have stayed buried. And yet, it felt like something inside him had already split. The room smelled faintly of rain dust and bread. He didn't know if it was real or just his mind pulling sense from old corners. The past was doing that now, stirring itself in the quiet, whispering through cracked window frames. Tommy padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Is it still raining?" "A little," Caleb said. "Want pancakes? Can I help only if you're prepared for chaos?" Tommy grinned. They cooked together, and for a few minutes the house sounded like any other house, laughter sizzling, batter forks scraping plates. But when they sat down to eat, Caleb noticed something strange. A draft. The kind that didn't belong. He followed it, tracing the air until he stood in the hallway beside the back bedroom. The door was open, but something was off. He stepped inside and felt it immediately. The floor beneath his feet was colder in one corner. He crouched, running his fingers along the floorboards. One gave slightly under pressure. A loose board. He pried it up gently, heart steady. Beneath it, tucked between joists, was a small wooden box, green tin edges scuffed from time. He pulled it out carefully and opened it. Inside were letters. Dozens. Yellowed envelopes, some barely sealed anymore. All addressed to the same name. Jonah Price. Caleb stared at them, all postmarked from Lorraine. All undelivered. His hand hovered over the top one. It was dated August 1979, the year before he was born. He didn't read it, not yet. But he would. He carried the box into the kitchen and set it on the table. Tommy looked up, curious. "What's that? Something Grandma left behind," Caleb said quietly. "I think it's time we started understanding her." Before he could explain more, there was a knock at the door. Quick, familiar. Marisol. She stepped in, cheeks flushed from the raincoat draped over one arm. "You all right?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Caleb glanced at the box, then back at her. Close. She walked to the table slowly, then stopped when she saw the name on the envelopes. "Jonah," she whispered. "You knew," she hesitated. "I suspected. Heard the name once or twice. Your mama..." She was careful with the past. Too careful. Marisol pulled out a chair, but didn't sit. "What are you going to do with them? I don't know yet," Caleb admitted. "But I think I need to know who he is. If he's alive. If he even knows she wrote. She never said she sent them. They were all here. Unopened. Untouched." Marisol's gaze drifted to the window, where the trees swayed gently beneath the weight of morning. "I think she was scared he wouldn't forgive her," she said softly. "Sometimes people hold back not because they don't love you, but because they think they've lost the right to try." Caleb nodded slowly. The words settled heavy in the room. Then Tommy broke the quiet. "Can I show Miss Marisol what I found?" Caleb blinked. "What did you find in the barn?" Tommy said. "I went there before breakfast. There's a ladder and a room up top, kinda hidden." Caleb and Marisol exchanged glances. "You went out alone?" Caleb asked. "I took the big flashlight, and I wasn't scared." Marisol smiled. "He's braver than most grown men." Caleb exhaled and stood. "Show us." The barn groaned as they stepped inside the damp wood stretching like old joints. The air smelled of hay and rain-soaked timber. Dust danced in the filtered light coming through the cracks. Tommy led them to a ladder tucked behind a stack of old crates. It looked handmade, nailed in decades ago. He climbed first, fearless. Caleb followed, then helped Marisol up. The loft space above was wider than it looked, dusty, cluttered, but intact. Sunlight streaked through a missing board, near the roofline, casting long shadows across the room. In the far corner was a small desk. On it, a stack of sketch pads, a cracked mirror, an old coffee can full of pencils, and beside it on the floor a folded blanket. Carefully placed. Undisturbed. This was someone's space, Marisol whispered. Caleb opened one of the sketchbooks. Inside were pencil drawings, rough but full of emotion. A young woman with soft eyes. The same woman again, older, holding a baby. The farmhouse porch. The oak tree that no longer stood. Marisol leaned closer. "That's your mother." "And that's not me," Caleb said, pointing at the baby. He turned the page. Another sketch. A boy, maybe 6 or 7, standing at the edge of the woods. Then a note scribbled below in messy handwriting. He wanted to come back. She told him he couldn't, said it wasn't his home anymore. Marisol touched the edge of the page. She never stopped thinking about him. Caleb looked around the room, taking in the quiet, the care. "She made this for him," he said. "This whole place." It was waiting. Marisol's voice was barely above a whisper. She was waiting. They stood there for a long moment, surrounded by secrets and silence. Then Caleb said it out loud. "I need to find him." Marisol met his eyes. "Are you sure?" "No," he admitted. "But I think he deserves to know she never forgot him." Tommy sat cross-legged on the floor, looking up at the ceiling like he could see something they couldn't. "Maybe he's waiting too," he said simply. Caleb ruffled his son's hair. "Maybe." As they climbed down the ladder, the sun broke through the clouds outside, casting warm light across the porch and spilling into the barn's open doors. Caleb glanced at Marisol. She smiled at him gently. "You're not the only one Lorraine left pieces for." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "You think I'll find him?" She didn't answer right away. Then, with a certainty that felt like sunlight through old glass, she said, "I think you're already closer than you realize." The sun had burned off the last of the morning haze when Caleb pulled into the gravel lot behind Dwayne Hatcher's law office. The building used to be a feed store back when Rockvale had more farmers than tourists, but now it stood with a fresh coat of paint and a sign that read, "Hatcher and Boone, Estates Family Land Rights." Caleb hadn't planned to come here today, but after finding Jonah's name over and over in those unopened letters, and that loft space hidden away like a shrine, he couldn't sit with the weight of it anymore. He needed clarity. And this town, for all its charm, was a maze of whispers and guarded glances. Dwayne greeted him at the front desk, just as Caleb remembered, a wiry man with a thick southern drawl and sharp eyes that didn't miss much. "Well, well, Lorraine's boy returns." He extended a hand. "Didn't think you'd be back in these parts." Caleb shook it. "Neither did I. But I'm trying to figure out what she left behind." Dwayne motioned him into the back office. The room smelled faintly of old books and floor polish. Files were stacked neatly on shelves, with a brass lamp casting warm light across a long oak desk. "You're here about the farm?" Dwayne asked, sitting down. Caleb hesitated. "Sort of. But also, someone named Jonah Price." Dwayne froze just for a second. Then he leaned back in his chair. "I figured you'd find that name eventually. You knew I helped Lorraine update her will 10 years ago. She made me promise not to tell anyone, especially not you." Why Dwayne sighed? Because the truth was wrapped up in shame. And Lorraine, she couldn't forgive herself for the way things happened. Caleb leaned forward. Was he her son? Yes. The word settled heavy in the room. "She was barely 18, Dwayne continued. "Family was in a bad place. Her father was strict. Church was stricter. She got sent away to stay with an aunt in Georgia. Baby was born there. Placed through a private adoption. Quiet, clean, no paper trail easy to follow." Caleb swallowed. But she kept writing to him. Every year Dwayne nodded. Birthday letters, Christmas, updates about you once you were born. None of them mailed. She kept them in that green box. Told me if anything ever happened to her, you'd find them. She ever tried to find him once, a few years after you were born? But by then he'd been adopted by a family in Kentucky. His name was changed. She thought about reaching out, got close, but she never went through with it. Caleb ran a hand down his face. "Do you know where he is now?" Dwayne pulled open a drawer and slid out a file. "I can get you a name, maybe an address, but I need you to be sure. This opens a door you can't close." Caleb looked down at the file. His heart pounded not with fear, but with something deeper. The ache of being one page away from a brother he never knew he had. "I need to know," he said quietly. "Even if he doesn't want to meet me. I need to know who he is." Dwayne nodded and began typing on his computer. "Give me a day. I'll make a few calls." Caleb stood. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, Dwayne said one more thing. "Lorraine loved you, Caleb. But she carried that loss like a second shadow. If she kept the farm all these years, it wasn't for herself." Caleb paused in the doorway. Then who was it for? Dwayne looked him straight in the eye. For the son she never got to raise. And the one who might bring him back. That evening, Caleb walked back to the farmhouse alone. Tommy was with Marisol helping feed the goats. He'd begged to stay, and Marisol had smiled in that calm way of hers and said, "I'll make sure he doesn't climb anything taller than me." The porch light flickered on as he stepped inside. He sat at the table, opened another letter. "Dear Jonah, it's been 10 years since I held you. I still remember the way your hair curled at the back. I still dream about rocking you to sleep. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. I was scared, and I didn't know what love was supposed to cost." He stopped reading. The words were too raw. He looked up to find Marisol standing in the doorway, watching him with quiet eyes. "How long have you been there?" he asked, startled. "Just long enough," she said softly. "Tommy's drawing pictures of goats. I figured you could use some company." He nodded, grateful. She came in, sat across from him. "You okay?" He shook his head. "No, but I think I will be." Marisol glanced at the letter. She never mailed them, no, just kept them. Like hope in a box. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Marisol said, "You know I was 16 when I lost my husband. Car accident. He was on his way home from the feed store." Caleb looked up, surprised. She smiled gently. "It's not something I talk about much. People look at you different when you've been through something. Like you're marked." He nodded. "I get that. I used to come sit on that porch with your mama sometimes. We didn't talk much. Just drank coffee and watched the trees move. I think she liked that I didn't ask questions." Caleb's voice broke slightly. I spent my whole life thinking she was cold. But maybe she just didn't know how to unbury the past. Marisol reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Pain buries itself deep, she said. And love? It's the only thing that knows how to dig it up. Their hands lingered quiet and warm. Outside, the wind stirred the branches gently, and the sky turned that soft peach color that only happened right before dusk. Caleb exhaled slowly. I think I'm ready to find him. Marisol didn't flinch. She just nodded. Then let's find him. And for the first time since he'd come back to Rockvale, the farmhouse didn't feel like a wait. It felt like a beginning. A soft fog hugged the hills the next morning, turning Rockvale into a watercolor painting. Muted edges washed skies, and a stillness that made even the birds hold their breath. Caleb stepped onto the porch with a coffee in one hand and the green tin box in the other. He didn't open it. Not yet. But just holding it made his pulse slow, like the weight of it anchored him to something deeper than questions. Marisol's truck pulled up just after 7. She stepped out wearing boots, jeans, and a loose flannel shirt that looked like it had known its share of hard mornings. Her hair was pulled back again, but a few strands had slipped loose around her face. She looked like she belonged in every season. Caleb met her halfway down the steps. "You sure you want to come?" he asked. "I didn't bring coffee for nothing," she said, handing him a thermos. "Besides, I told you if we're digging, I've got a good shovel." He smiled, and for a moment it almost felt easy. They got into his truck, Tommy still asleep at Marisol's place, her cousin watching him for the morning. The roads stretched quiet beneath the trees as they drove east back toward the old county courthouse, where Dwayne Hatcher had said he might dig up a lead. Caleb broke the silence first. "You ever wonder what your life would have looked like if one thing, just one, had gone differently?" Marisol stared out the window a beat before answering. "All the time. But I also know if I hadn't lost what I lost, I never would have started the farm. Never would have stayed in Rockvale. Never would have met your mom. Or you." He glanced at her. She caught it, then looked away with the hint of a smile. "Don't make that face. I'm just saying, life reroutes us sometimes. Doesn't mean it's wrong, just different." Caleb nodded. "I keep thinking about Lorraine, all the times I thought she was shutting me out. But maybe she was just trying to protect me from something she couldn't face." "Grief makes people quiet," Marisol said. "Shame makes them silent." He held her words a moment longer. They reached the courthouse just after it opened. Dwayne was already waiting outside under the overhang, flipping through a thin manila folder. He handed it to Caleb. "I couldn't find much, but I got this." Caleb opened it slowly. Inside was a name, a new one, Reverend Jonah Price. Born in Georgia, adopted in Kentucky Seminary School in Louisville, now serving at a church just outside of Lexington. Pastor Caleb whispered, eyebrows lifting. "Been there over 20 years, Dwayne said. "Good man from what I hear. Small congregation. Rural community." Caleb swallowed hard. "He doesn't know who he is, does he know?" "Not unless your mother told him which—" "She didn't." Marisol stepped closer, reading over his shoulder. "How far is it?" 3 hours, Dwayne said. "Maybe less if you skip the back roads." Caleb closed the folder. "That's not far at all." Dwayne looked at him, serious now. "You don't have to go today, I know. But if you do, don't go looking for answers you want. Go open to the ones you might get." That stayed with Caleb as they got back in the truck. The road out of town felt different this time, less like leaving and more like moving toward something. The map app on Marisol's phone directed them past cow fields, winding creeks, and white fences that marked the edges of other people's stories. Caleb drove mostly in silence. Marisol beside him, one hand resting on her knee, the other occasionally adjusting the volume on a playlist they never discussed. It was quiet music, the kind that doesn't try to fill silence, just respects it. Finally, they pulled up in front of a modest red brick church tucked beneath a grove of hickories. A white sign out front read, Hope Valley Baptist, Pastor Jonah Price. Caleb cut the engine. His hands were steady, but his chest buzzed with something wild and unsettled. "You want me to wait?" Marisol asked. He looked at her. The sun caught the warmth in her eyes, and something settled just a little inside him. "Would you come with me?" Her expression didn't change, but her answer was immediate. Yes. They walked across the gravel lot together, Caleb clutching the folder like it might change everything or nothing at all. The front door creaked open when he knocked. A woman in her 50s greeted them wearing a navy cardigan and kind eyes. "Service isn't until Sunday, but you're welcome to look around." Caleb cleared his throat. "We're actually here to speak with Pastor Price." The woman paused. "He's in his office, just down the hall. I'll let him know." She disappeared behind the hallway, and the seconds that followed stretched like hours. Caleb felt the walls tightening. Every step toward this man felt like peeling away layers he'd spent his whole life building. Then the door opened, and Jonah stood there. He was tall, maybe in his early 60s, graying at the temples, strong, calm presence. His eyes scanned Caleb, and something flickered curiosity, maybe, or recognition he couldn't place. "I'm Pastor Price," he said, voice warm but cautious. "Can I help you?" Caleb hesitated. Marisol stood close. "My name is Caleb Mercer," he said slowly. I think you knew my mother." Jonah tilted his head. "Lorraine Mercer." The name landed like a distant bell. "Yes," Caleb said, heart pounding. "She passed recently. I found letters. And your name." "A lot." Jonah didn't speak, just looked at him, breath shallow. Then, after a long pause, "You're her son." Caleb nodded. Jonah stepped back, hand on the doorframe. He looked older suddenly, like time had rushed in all at once. "I never thought I'd meet anyone from that part of my life." Caleb reached into his coat, pulled out one of the letters. "She wrote to you, every year." Jonah took it like it might break in his hand. He didn't open it, just held it to his chest and closed his eyes. Marisol touched Caleb's arm gently. "Let him read it in his time." Jonah finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I always wondered why no one came." "Why I never heard," she wanted to, Caleb said. "She just didn't know how." Jonah looked at him, then really looked. "And why did you come?" Caleb didn't have a practiced answer. "Only the truth. Because I needed to know if you were real, and I needed to see the face of the person my mother never stopped loving." Jonah's eyes filled. "She never forgot me." "No," Caleb said. She remembered everything. The silence was thick, sacred, and for the first time in decades, two brothers stood face to face, one raised in silence, the other raised in love. And somehow, in that quiet hallway of a church in Kentucky, they both began to understand what it meant to belong. Jonah led them into his office, a modest room, with soft lighting, 2 old chairs, and a bookshelf lined with worn devotionals, framed family photos, and a small cross carved from cedar. Caleb sat slowly, still holding the letter he'd handed over. Jonah placed it carefully on the desk between them, resting his hand on it like he wasn't ready to let go. "I can't believe she kept them all," Jonah said after a long pause. "I always thought she gave me away and forgot." Caleb shook his head. "She didn't forget. She just couldn't face what it would mean to find you. Every year she'd write you letters and then seal them away. Jonah leaned back, eyes glossy. You have any idea how many nights I prayed someone would show up and say she wanted me back, that it wasn't because she didn't love me, but because she had no choice? She wanted to, Caleb said softly. She just lived her life with so much regret it ate her from the inside out. Marisol had stayed near the door, quiet but present. She watched the exchange like someone watching two rivers finally meet after winding apart for too long. Jonah glanced at her. You from Rockvale? She nodded. Marisol Vega. I live next to the Mercer farm. Been helping Caleb sort through the pieces. Jonah offered a faint smile. Then you probably know more about my mother than I do. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was weighty, full of the kind of emotion that didn't have words yet. Caleb finally spoke. I didn't come here to unload this on you. I didn't know if I'd even find you, but once I saw your name, I couldn't turn away. I'm glad you didn't. Jonah's voice cracked a little. I've lived my whole life with questions I was too afraid to chase. And now one answer walks through my door. Caleb leaned forward. I want you to come back to the farm, just for a day. There's more there. Your drawing's a room our mom left untouched. I think she built it for you. Or maybe for the version of you she never got to know. Jonah looked down at the letter again. I don't know if I'm ready. I wasn't either, Caleb admitted. But it changed me. I think it's time we both see the whole picture. Marisol stepped forward, voice gentle. She left that place full of quiet truths. Maybe it's time you heard them. Jonah gave a slow nod. All right, I'll come. They left the office with an unspoken understanding. No promises, no expectations. Just a shared willingness to open a door they'd both been standing in front of for years. Fortissime. The drive back to Rockvale felt different than the drive out. The air seemed thicker, heavier, with what now existed between them past and future tangled in the space between glances and silence. Jonah followed behind them in his truck. Caleb kept glancing in the rearview mirror, almost afraid he'd turn around. But he didn't. At the farmhouse, the light was slanting long and gold across the fields, and the porch creaked under their feet as the three of them stepped up together. Caleb opened the front door, motioning Jonah inside. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, Jonah stopped. His eyes scanned the hallway, the living room, the framed photo of Lorraine on the side table, her smile frozen in black and white. He took a breath, then whispered, It smells the same. Caleb watched him quietly. She wore that lavender lotion, Jonah said. I remember it, from when I was small. Marisol looked between them. Come on. There's something you need to see. They led him to the barn. The wood groaned beneath their steps, the scent of hay and rain still clinging to the beams. Jonah's eyes widened when he saw the ladder. She kept it, he murmured. You knew about it? Caleb asked. Jonah nodded. It was our hideout. When I was little, she'd take me up there after sunset. We'd look out at the trees. She called it our sky porch. Said we could say anything up there and the stars would hold our secrets. He climbed the ladder slowly, one rung at a time. Caleb and Marisol followed close behind. When he reached the top, he stopped again. The sketch pads, the blanket, the mirror, everything as it had been left. Jonah walked to the desk and ran his fingers over the wood like it was a sacred relic. She kept it exactly the same, he said. Like she was waiting for me to come home. He picked up a pencil, turning it slowly in his hand. I drew here. After she left, I'd dream about this place. I thought it was just a memory I made up. But it's real. He sat down slowly, letting the silence fill the space. Caleb crouched beside him. "There's more in the house. A journal, more letters. I want to see them. I want you to have them." Jonah looked up. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Caleb said. "You're here. That's enough." He stood and looked out across the fields. She never let herself believe she deserved forgiveness, but she tried, in her own way. Jonah's voice cracked. "She didn't need to earn it. I never stopped wanting her." The barn settled around them, quiet and full of ghosts. Marisol moved to the window, watching the sunlight filter through the slats. "It's strange, isn't it? How love leaves behind echoes, even when we think it's long gone." Jonah stood steadier now. He turned to Caleb. "You look like her, around the eyes." Caleb nodded, unsure what to do with the lump in his throat. "I have a son," he finally said. "Tommy. He's 8. Jonah smiled. "She never told me." "She wanted to," Caleb said. "But by the time I was old enough to understand, it was like the words had dried up in her mouth." "Can I meet him?" Jonah asked. "Yeah," Caleb said. "I think he'd like that." They made their way down the ladder together, step by step, the sun lowering behind them. When they reached the ground, the barn stood still again, its long-held secrets now shared, its purpose renewed. Jonah turned back one last time, eyes lingering on the loft. "She loved us both," he said. "She just didn't know how to hold that kind of love in 2 hands." Caleb nodded. "Maybe now we can." The late afternoon sky stretched wide and blue over the Mercer farmhouse, the sun casting long shadows across the porch, where Tommy sat cross-legged, sketching something intently on a piece of cardboard. His tongue poked from the corner of his mouth as he focused, pencil flying. Caleb watched from the doorway, arms crossed, heart full and uneasy all at once. It had been 3 days since Jonah came to the farm, and the weight of it hadn't left Caleb's chest. Not in a bad way, just in a way that made every breath feel like it carried someone else's name, someone else's past. Jonah was still here. He'd moved into the guest room at Marisol's place for the time being, saying the barn loft felt too sacred to claim as his own just yet. Daddy Tommy called, without looking up. "What's Uncle Jonah's favorite animal?" Caleb blinked. The word uncle felt new, sharp, and soft all at once. "I don't know Bud. You'll have to ask him." "I'm making him a card," Tommy said, "like the kind you give when someone finds out your family." Caleb swallowed the tightness in his throat and walked down to crouch beside him. "What's that next to the horse?" "That's supposed to be me," Tommy said proudly. "We're racing." Caleb smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "He's going to love it." He stood again just as Marisol's truck pulled into the driveway. She stepped out, her shirt speckled with dust, and her curls pulled back loosely. She looked tired, but in the kind of way that made her glow more than fade. "Hey," she called, brushing her hands on her jeans. "You got a minute?" Caleb met her halfway down the gravel. "Always." She paused, eyes searching his. "He asked me something today." Jonah. Caught me off guard. What did he ask if I thought Lorraine ever tried to reach out through the church? Through anyone? And then he said something strange. What Marisol looked down, then back up. He said someone once told him that she'd come to Kentucky, just once. Stood at the back of the church during a Sunday service and left before the final hymn. Caleb's breath caught. "She never told me that," he said. "She never told anyone," Marisol replied. But he remembers seeing her. Said he thought it was a dream for years. Then she showed up in those letters, and it started making sense. They stood in silence a moment, both absorbing what it meant. Lorraine hadn't just written. She'd watched from the shadows. She'd tried. Marisol touched Caleb's arm gently. "You okay?" I'm not sure he admitted. "But I think I'm starting to understand her in ways I never did." "You're doing a good thing," she said softly, "letting all this come up. Most people wouldn't have the stomach for it." He looked at her, then really looked. She wasn't just someone who'd helped him. She was becoming part of the story, too, whether either of them was ready or not. "Do you ever think we were supposed to find each other like this?" he asked suddenly. Marisol tilted her head. "You mean, you and Jonah? I mean you and me." She didn't answer at first, just looked at him with a softness that made his chest tighten. Sometimes she said quietly, "I think life gives us the right people at the wrong time, so we can learn to recognize them when the right time comes." He took a small step closer. "And you think this is the right time?" Marisol smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I think we're getting there." Just then, Tommy called from the porch. "Uncle Jonah's here." Caleb turned to see Jonah walking up the drive, a smile on his face, his steps less cautious than they'd been a few days ago. He looked like a man slowly fitting back into skin he'd forgotten he owned. "I didn't mean to interrupt, Jonah," said as he approached. "Just wanted to drop this off." He held out a small envelope. Caleb took it. "It's for Tommy," Jonah explained. "A thank you for the drawing he gave me yesterday. It's a letter, I guess, and a sketch of my own. Thought I'd return the favor." Caleb smiled. "He'll love that." Marisol stepped aside, giving the brothers space. "Jonah, Caleb said there's something I want to ask you." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "All right. Would you come with me tomorrow morning to the cemetery?" Jonah's expression sobered. "You mean Lorraine's grave? I haven't been since the funeral. I think it's time you said whatever you need to say. To her. For you." Jonah looked down the wind, catching the corner of his shirt. After a pause, he nodded. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." That night, the house was still except for the low creak of the old boards and the sound of a gentle rain tapping the windows. Caleb sat at the kitchen table. The envelope Jonah had given Tommy now opened in front of him. The letter was simple, just a short paragraph about how much the drawing meant, how it made Jonah feel like he'd always had a place here, even when he didn't know it. The sketch was a surprise. It was a picture of Lorraine holding two boys, one on each side, both smiling, both reaching for her hands. Caleb stared at it for a long time. He didn't realize he was crying until a tear landed softly on the edge of the paper. He wiped it away and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He could almost hear her voice, the one he hadn't heard in months. "You'll understand one day." Now he was beginning to. And tomorrow, maybe Jonah would too. The gravel crunched beneath their tires as Caleb pulled into the small cemetery just outside Rockvale. The morning air was cool, with the fog still curling low across the fields, like it hadn't made up its mind to leave. The place was quiet, too quiet, maybe, but in a way that felt respectful, not lonely. Jonah sat in the passenger seat, fingers curled around a single daisy he'd picked from the edge of the barn that morning. Neither of them had spoken much on the drive. Some silences didn't need breaking. Caleb parked near the old oak tree that had watched over this stretch of land longer than anyone could remember. Beyond it, scattered in gentle rows, were the stones, some new, some weathered, all with names that meant something to someone. "She's just over here," Caleb said softly, pushing open the truck door. Jonah followed him without a word, the flower still in hand. They walked the short path through dewy grass until they reached a modest headstone, simple, carved in pale gray, with only her name, birth, and death dates, and a short phrase beneath, "Loved in silence, remembered forever." Caleb stopped a few feet back, giving Jonah space. Jonah stepped forward, eyes fixed on the stone. He crouched, slowly placed the daisy at its base, and let out a breath that had clearly waited decades to be released. "I don't know where to start," he whispered. His voice wasn't meant for Caleb. It was meant for her. "I thought you forgot me. I thought maybe I was just a mistake you never wanted to remember." He paused, swallowing hard. But then Caleb showed up. And he brought your words, your drawings, your memory. His voice broke. And now I don't know what to do with all this love that never got said. Caleb watched, heart, heavy, throat tight. The wind stirred faintly, brushing through the grass like a soft apology from the sky. Jonah rested his hand gently on the headstone. "I forgive you. Not because you asked, but because I understand now. You were young. You were scared. But you loved me, didn't you? In the only way you could." A tear slipped down his cheek, and he didn't wipe it away. "I love you too." He sat there for a long while, just breathing. Caleb stayed quiet, letting the moment belong fully to Jonah. The way it should. Finally, Jonah stood slow and steady and turned toward Caleb. "Thank you." Caleb nodded. "I'm glad you came." As they walked back to the truck, the wind picked up slightly, lifting the hem of Jonah's jacket. He looked back one more time. "I thought closure was a clean feeling," he said quietly. "But it's messy. Grief and love tangled up." Caleb looked at him. "Yeah, but it's real." Later that day, back at the farmhouse, the kitchen was full of movement and the smell of something sweet baking in the oven. Marisol had come over with 2 pies, 1 peach, 1 apple, and insisted Tommy help make whipped cream from scratch, which had turned into a full-blown food fight. Jonah sat at the table watching with a smile he hadn't shown before. It was soft easy, like something in him had loosened. Marisol wiped whipped cream from her cheek and turned to Caleb, grinning. "I should open a bakery, or a daycare, maybe both." Caleb laughed. "As long as it's not in my kitchen." Tommy popped up beside Jonah with a spoonful of cream. "Want to try some?" Jonah tasted it, made a show of thinking it over, then nodded seriously. 5 stars. Tommy beamed. After dinner, when the sun began to dip low and paint the sky in warm golds and oranges, Jonah stood and cleared his throat. "There's something I want to ask." Everyone quieted. "I'd like to have a service. Just a small one. For Lorraine. Not because she asked for it, but because I think she deserves to be seen. Remembered, not just buried." Caleb nodded, slow and sure. "I'd like that." Marisol reached for her iced tea, her eyes thoughtful. "You want to hold it here on the farm?" Jonah looked around at the walls, the floors, the ceiling beams Lorraine had walked under every day for decades. "Yeah, right here." The decision hung in the air like a promise. Something sacred. Something right. That evening, after Jonah had gone back to Marisol's and Tommy was asleep in his room with sketchbooks scattered across the bed, Caleb sat on the porch with a glass of water and a restless heart. Marisol joined him a few minutes later, barefoot hair down her presence as natural as the evening breeze. "Big day," she said softly, sitting beside him. "Yeah," he murmured. "And somehow it still feels like we're just getting started." She glanced sideways at him. "You mean with Jonah? I mean with everything. My mom? The farm? You?" She didn't look away. "What about me?" He hesitated, then finally said what had been circling in his chest for weeks. "I think I'm falling for you." The words came out, quiet, raw. Marisol blinked, then looked down at her hands. "I was afraid of that," she said. Caleb's heart faltered. "Why?" "Because I think I'm falling too. And that scares me." He reached over, gently took her hand. "What if we just let it scare us together?" Marisol looked up at him, something vulnerable and brave flashing in her eyes. Then she nodded. Just once. Okay. The sun dropped below the hills, and the first stars peeked out through the purple haze of evening. They sat there hand in hand, not rushing anything, not needing to, because finally they were choosing each other not just for the moment, but for whatever came next. The morning sun poured across the fields like honey, slow and warm, stretching over the farmhouse and turning the dew into tiny diamonds. From the porch, Caleb watched Tommy chase after a runaway napkin that had flown off the breakfast table. It cartwheeled across the yard like it had somewhere to be. "Got it?" Tommy shouted, lifting it triumphantly. Caleb smiled, then turned to the kitchen window, where Marisol was rinsing a mixing bowl, her sleeves rolled up, her curls pulled back with a patterned scarf. It was a quiet scene, ordinary maybe, but to Caleb it felt like something rare, something earned. A week had passed since Jonah stood at their mother's grave and whispered forgiveness into the wind. And in that time something had shifted, not just between Caleb and his brother, but within the air of the entire farm. It felt softer, like the house had exhaled. Jonah was staying longer than planned. What was supposed to be a few days had turned into a quiet, we'll see. He'd started helping Marisol with repairs on the barn, and even joined them for evening meals, like he'd always had a place at the table, which, in a way, he had. But it wasn't all smooth. There were moments when silence crept in, when a question would rise that no one quite knew how to answer. Like what Jonah planned to do after the service they were holding for Lorraine this Sunday. Or what it meant for Tommy to suddenly have an uncle when he'd spent his whole life as an only child. And then there was Caleb and Marisol, whatever it was they were building. It was fragile like glass, still cooling from the fire. One wrong move and it might crack. Later that afternoon, Jonah found Caleb in the workshop behind the barn, sanding down one of the old porch chairs Lorraine used to sit in. "I didn't know she kept all this," Jonah said, leaning against the doorway. "Every board, every nail, it feels like she never left." Caleb looked up, brushing sawdust from his hands. "Yeah. She had this way of holding on to things, even when she couldn't talk about them." Jonah walked over, picked up one of the smaller slats of wood from the table. "You rebuilding it, trying to. Thought we could use a few more seats for Sunday." Jonah nodded, then hesitated. "I got a call this morning." Caleb straightened. "From who? The church. Back in Kentucky. They want me to come back next week. Fill in for the interim pastor who's out on medical leave. Just a few months." Caleb didn't speak right away. "That's good," he finally said, though his chest tightened with something he didn't expect: disappointment. Or maybe just the sting of another goodbye on the horizon. Jonah glanced at him. "I haven't said yes yet?" "Why not?" Jonah gave a small smile. "Because for the first time in a long time I feel like I belong somewhere. Here. With you. With all this." Caleb exhaled, eyes softening. "You do belong here. But I don't want to ask you to stay if your heart's still in Kentucky. You built a life there, a good one." Jonah rubbed the back of his neck. "I just keep thinking, maybe there's a way to be part of both." Caleb nodded slowly. "Maybe there is." Before either of them could say more, Marisol's voice called from outside. "Boys, I need some help with the folding tables." Jonah chuckled. Duty calls. They walked out together, the tension fading with each step. By late afternoon, the backyard had transformed. Marisol had enlisted half the neighborhood to help. Folding chairs lined the edge of the pasture. Strings of warm lights had been draped between fence posts. A table covered in white linen held mason jars filled with wildflowers. It wasn't a formal service, but it was heartfelt. Exactly the kind of gathering Lorraine would have pretended not to like, while secretly loving every minute. As the sun dipped low, people began to arrive. Caleb stood near the barn, watching faces he hadn't seen in years appear one by one. Former neighbors, old church friends, a few of Lorraine's quilting group. Even Mrs. Davis, the librarian who used to save Tommy stacks of picture books, showed up with a fresh peach cobbler. Then, unexpectedly, came someone Caleb didn't recognize. A woman in her early 70s wearing a pale blue dress and a gold locket. She walked up slowly, eyes scanning the space with a mix of sadness and recognition. "You must be Caleb," she said, extending a hand. "I am," he replied, shaking it gently. "I'm sorry, have we met?" "No," she said. "But I met your mother once, a long time ago. My name's Alice Gentry. I was a friend of your grandmother's, back when Lorraine was sent away." Caleb blinked. "I remember when she came to Georgia, the woman continued, her voice soft, scared, alone. But she had this fire in her. She used to sit out on the porch and hum to her belly, said she was singing to her boy." Jonah had walked up by then, standing just behind Caleb. Alice looked at him and gasped. "You're him." Jonah nodded slowly. "I guess I am." She smiled through glassy eyes. "She loved you. She just didn't know how to fight for herself back then. But don't you doubt for a second she loved you." Jonah swallowed hard and reached out to steady himself on the fence post. "Thank you," he whispered. Alice patted his arm. "She would be so proud of both of you." As she walked away, Jonah turned to Caleb. "It's like every time I think I've reached the end of the story, someone hands me another chapter." Caleb nodded. That's how it was with her. She left trails, not answers. Marisol appeared beside them, wiping her hands on a towel. "Everything's ready." Jonah looked at the crowd, then at her. "Would you say something?" Marisol blinked. "Me. You knew her better than anyone these last few years, and your voice people listened to it." Marisol hesitated, then nodded. She stepped to the center of the yard, raised her hand gently to hush the group. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice steady but full. Lorraine Mercer wasn't an easy woman to know, but she was worth knowing. She lived with a silence that came from pain, and a love that came from the deepest place a person can love. She paused, looking around. She made mistakes, she held secrets, but she also left behind something beautiful, this land, these people, a legacy rooted in redemption. Her eyes flicked to Jonah and Caleb. She taught us that it's never too late to speak the truth, and that sometimes healing doesn't look like forgetting, it looks like forgiving, and beginning again. Silence followed. Then soft clapping. Then embraces. Then tears. And in the center of it all stood two brothers, once strangers, now tied by something stronger than time. Family. The house was quiet again. The folding chairs were stacked, the last pie tin had been washed, and the guests had all gone home. Evening settled over the farm like a hush after a storm, peaceful, but charged with everything that had just happened. Caleb stood alone in the backyard, the sky above him streaked with the last light of sunset. He looked toward the barn, where the string lights still glowed softly against the wood. Ghosts of the day lingered, Jonah hugging Mrs. Davis. Tommy running between the chairs, Marisol's voice carrying through the air like a prayer. He heard the creak of the screen door behind him. He didn't have to turn to know it was her. "You didn't say much after the service," Marisol said gently as she stepped up beside him. Caleb nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "I didn't know how." She waited, giving him space. "I kept thinking about how much I never asked her," he said, "and how much she never gave. And now that I've finally started to understand her, she's gone." Marisol folded her arms, her voice low. "That's grief, Caleb. It's always unfinished business. He looked at her then. Really looked. I don't want us to be unfinished, he said. She went still. We've danced around this, he said. You and me, since I got here. But every time I think we're moving forward, you pull back. Marisol's jaw tightened. Her voice was soft, but her words were clear. Because I've been here before. He stepped closer. What do you mean I let someone into my world, once she said. He promised me roots, then left the moment life got complicated. I rebuilt everything after that, brick by brick. And just when I stopped waiting for someone to show up, you did. Caleb took that in. I'm not him, I know that she said, but knowing it doesn't make the fear disappear. He exhaled. Then tell me how to show you I'm staying. Marisol's eyes were glassy. Don't say things just because they sound right in the moment. You have a son, a farm, a brother you just found. You don't need one more thing pulling at you. I'm not being pulled, he said firmly. I'm being drawn to you. She looked away, eyes shimmering. What if we ruin this? What if we can't come back from it? Caleb reached for her hand, slow and sure. Then we try again, he said. And again. Because I'm not afraid of the hard parts if you're in them. Marisol's lips trembled, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. Then she stepped forward, resting her forehead against his chest. I want to believe you, she whispered. Then let's build something that doesn't need believing. Let's make it real. She didn't answer with words, just wrapped her arms around him and held on like she meant it. And in that quiet, shared breath, something shifted again, not just between them, but in the soil beneath them, in the house behind them, in the air that had carried so much memory, pain, and hope. From inside the house, Tommy's voice echoed down the hallway, singing some made-up song in the bathtub, blissfully unaware of the hearts untangling on the back porch. Caleb kissed the top of Marisol's head. Let's not wait anymore, he said. She looked up. You sure? He smiled. I've never been more sure of anything. The morning after the service brought with it a rare kind of stillness. Not the quiet that comes from absence, but the kind that follows deep release like the land itself had exhaled with them. Caleb sat on the front steps of the farmhouse, coffee in hand, watching the low fog lift from the fields. Tommy's bike leaned against the porch rail, still muddy from yesterday's adventure. The barn door hung open, sun pouring into its shadowed mouth. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Marisol appeared wrapped in a light flannel over her t-shirt. Her curls were still damp from the shower. She sat beside him, her shoulder brushing his. No words yet, just presence. I didn't sleep much, she murmured after a while. Caleb nodded. Me either. They sat in the soft rhythm of morning, sipping quietly. The unspoken had changed between them. There was no dramatic declaration, no swelling music, just a decision. And sometimes that was louder than anything else. You still thinking about going back to Georgia? She asked. He glanced sideways at her. No. Her brow rose. You sure? Caleb exhaled slow. Yeah, for the first time in a long time, I'm not trying to leave somewhere to find peace. I think I found it here. She smiled at that, small but sincere. Good, she said, nudging his knee with hers. Because I was starting to miss you before you even left. Inside the house, Tommy's laughter rang down the hallway, followed by the clatter of something hitting the floor. Sounds like breakfast is happening without us, Caleb said with a chuckle. Marisol stood and offered her hand. Then let's not miss it. Later that day, Jonah stood in the loft above the barn, sorting through a box he'd found tucked behind the old dresser Lorraine used to keep up there. Dust coated everything, but inside were bundles of letters wrapped in twine, a baby blanket, and a small stuffed bear with a missing eye. He held the bear in his hands like it was something holy. Footsteps on the ladder made him turn. Caleb poked his head up. "You okay?" Jonah nodded. "Just piecing things together." Caleb climbed up and crossed the space, crouching beside him. She kept everything Jonah whispered. Even this. He handed Caleb the bear. Its fabric was faded, the stitching loose, but it was clearly loved. "I remember this," Jonah said. "It was in the crib with me at the group home. I didn't know where it came from, but now—" Caleb's voice was low. "She must have left it with you." Jonah nodded, eyes glassy. "She did more than I gave her credit for." They sat there, sunlight painting golden patches across the floor. "You know," Jonah said after a long pause, "I've been thinking about the offer from the church back in Kentucky." Caleb tensed slightly. "Yeah, I think I'm going to say no." Caleb looked at him. "Really?" Jonah smiled faintly. "There's a different kind of work to do here. Not just with you, but with myself. This farm, this town, it feels like a place to grow something lasting." A beat of silence. "Also," Jonah added, "I kind of like being Uncle Jonah." Caleb laughed. "Tommy's not letting you off the hook now. He's already planning a comic book about the two of you." Jonah smirked. Uncle Jonah and Super Tommy exactly. They stood together, gazing around the loft that had carried so many of Lorraine's hopes. It no longer felt haunted. It felt full. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the family, because that's what they were now, gathered on the back porch. Tommy sat cross-legged, with crayons narrating his superhero storyline to anyone who'd listen. Marisol leaned back in the rocking chair, sipping sweet tea, her gaze drifting now and then to Caleb, with a smile that lingered longer each time. Jonah stood near the porch rail, a worn sketch pad in his hands. He was drawing again, something he hadn't done in years. And when Tommy leaned over to peek, he grinned. "It's us," the boy said. "That's me. And that's me," Jonah said. "See, I gave myself a cape this time." Caleb looked out over the land. The light hit the tall grass just right, and for a moment everything shimmered, real and unreal, all at once. "I never thought I'd come back here and find more than ghosts," he said quietly to Marisol. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You didn't find ghosts, Caleb. You found roots." And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing on borrowed ground. He felt home. The first cold snap of fall had settled over the valley, brushing the fields with frost that glittered just after sunrise. The trees around the Mercer farm had started to turn bright reds, golden yellows, and deep rusts that caught the afternoon light like stained glass. Caleb stood near the barn, with Jonah a tarp in hand, as they prepped to cover the last stack of firewood before the evening chill returned. The air smelled like earth and wood smoke, the kind of scent that stuck in your shirt and stayed with you all day. "Never thought I'd enjoy this kind of quiet," Jonah said, cinching the tarp. "It used to feel like silence was a punishment. Now, it feels earned." Caleb handed him a bungee cord. "It's different when you're not running from something." Jonah looked at him. "You think we've stopped running?" Caleb considered that. "I think we slowed down long enough to see where we were." A gust of wind stirred the trees, sending a swirl of leaves dancing across the gravel. From the distance came the faint hum of laughter, Marisol and Tommy raking a pile of leaves into a massive heap, only for Tommy to belly flop into it like it was a prize-winning pool. Jonah grinned. "Kid's gonna need a full rinse after that." "2 rinses," Caleb added. They finished up the tarp and headed toward the house boots, crunching over the gravel. As they walked, Jonah hesitated. "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." Caleb glanced over. "Yeah, I got a letter. From my birth father." Caleb slowed. Seriously, yeah. Found my email somehow. Said he'd been thinking about me for years, but didn't know how to reach out. Then the local news picked up a small piece about the service we held for Lorraine. Somehow it got back to him. Caleb's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Do you want to meet him? I don't know, Jonah said honestly. Part of me feels like it would answer some questions. Another part thinks, maybe I don't need to stir that up. Maybe I've found enough here. They reached the porch where Marisol stood, wiping leaves off her jeans, her cheeks pink from the cold. Tommy was still buried in the leaf pile, popping his head up with twigs stuck in his hair like a wild woodland creature. Caleb turned to Jonah. Whatever you decide, just make sure you're doing it for you. Not because you think you owe anyone closure. Jonah nodded. That's the hard part, isn't it? Figuring out what belongs to you and what's someone else's story. Caleb gave his shoulder a squeeze. You're doing fine. Later that evening, with Tommy in bed and Jonah back in the barn loft reading, Caleb found himself in the kitchen with Marisol. The pie she'd baked that afternoon, blackberry with a buttery crumble, sat on the counter cooling. She sliced 2 pieces without asking and slid one across to him. They sat at the table, just the 2 of them, as the wind pressed against the windows. Feels like everything's shifting again, Caleb said. Marisol looked at him. You mean Jonah? I mean all of it. My mom, the farm, you. Every time I get used to one kind of peace, something new shows up. She nodded slowly. Life isn't still, Caleb. It breathes, it pulls and expands, and sometimes it asks us to let go of control so something better can find its way in. He leaned back in his chair, watching her. And what about us? Are we something better? Marisol's eyes held his for a long moment. We're something real. That's better than perfect. Caleb stood and crossed the space between them. He didn't speak right away. He just pulled her into his arms, slow and deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. She didn't resist. She folded into him like it was the only place she'd ever wanted to be. And there, in the quiet of that old kitchen, with the smell of pie, the ticking of the clock, and the soft whistle of wind outside, they stayed. 2 people no longer looking for escape, just choosing to stay. The sun filtered through the barn windows in long golden lines, catching on the dust that danced lazily in the air. Jonah stood by the open loft window, hands tucked in his jacket pockets, the wind lifting his hair just enough to remind him fall was almost done. He could smell rain coming, that deep, earthy scent that made you feel like something old was about to be washed clean. Behind him, footsteps creaked on the wooden stairs. Caleb appeared, holding 2 mugs. Thought you could use something warm. Jonah took the mug, nodding his thanks. Apple cider. With a splash of maple, Caleb said, sitting down on a bench by the old trunk. Marisol's recipe. They drank in silence for a moment. The wind moved again. You ever feel like you're standing in your own life but still waiting for permission to live it? Jonah asked quietly. Caleb raised an eyebrow. That a pastor thing or a brother thing? Jonah chuckled. Probably both. He sipped the cider, then glanced at Caleb. I wrote back. To my birth father. Caleb leaned forward slightly. What did you say I told him? I'm not ready to meet, but I'm open. Someday. Caleb studied him. That sounds fair. It took a long time to realize I don't owe anyone more than I'm able to give. And that boundaries aren't rejection. They're clarity. That's growth, Caleb said. Hard won. Jonah gave a quiet nod, then looked out over the fields. You know, I think I want to stay. Not just for a visit. I want to make a life here. At least try. Caleb didn't hide the grin. You're serious, I am. I talked to the board back at my old church. They were understanding. Gave me their blessing. Said sometimes ministry looks like roots, not pulpits. Caleb raised his mug. To roots, then. They clinked cups. Back at the house, Marisol sat on the floor of the living room, with Tommy helping him assemble a model tractor he'd picked out from the hardware store clearance shelf. Pieces were everywhere, but the instructions had long been tossed aside, Tommy preferring to engineer his own version. "You think it needs 3 wheels in the front?" she asked, holding up the third axle. Tommy nodded seriously. "It goes faster that way." Marisol smiled. Of course. Can't argue with science." Caleb stepped in from the porch, hair tousled from the wind cheeks pink. He stood in the doorway a moment, just watching them. Something about the picture. Her laugh. Tommy's crooked grin, the way the late afternoon light fell across the hardwood floor, struck him in a way he hadn't expected. He wasn't on the outside looking in anymore. This was his now. Marisol looked up and saw him. "Hey." He crossed the room and knelt beside her. "Hey." Tommy looked between them. "Are you gonna marry her?" Marisol's eyebrows shot up. Caleb blinked. "Well, that's not usually the next step after cider." Tommy shrugged. "I just think she likes you." Marisol, clearly fighting a smile, looked at Caleb with one raised brow. "Do you?" Caleb met her eyes. "Very much." Her voice softened. "Then maybe we should talk about what comes next." Tommy beamed. "Can I wear a suit?" Caleb laughed. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, buddy." But even as the laughter faded, the idea lingered between them like a warm promise. That night, Caleb found himself unable to sleep. He stepped out onto the porch, the boards cold under his feet, the stars sharp and clear in the November sky. Marisol joined him a few minutes later, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "You do this every night?" she asked, settling next to him. "Only the ones that feel important?" She looked up at the sky. "Is this one of them?" He nodded. "Yeah. Everything feels different. Like the life I thought I'd lost found a way back to me." She leaned into his side. "I've been scared to hope for too much," she whispered. "It's easier to keep expectations low, less chance to be disappointed." "I used to think that too," he said. "But maybe the point isn't to protect ourselves from pain. Maybe it's to make the most of the peace when we find it." She didn't reply, but the way she tightened her arm around his said enough. They stood like that, wrapped in each other, and the hush of the night, until the cold began to bite at their fingers. As they turned to go back inside, Caleb paused. "You know," he said, "if I were the kind of guy to get ahead of himself, I might be looking at rings." Marisol smiled without looking at him. "Then it's a good thing I like surprises." They slipped back into the house, quiet and full of something that had once felt out of reach. But not anymore. The morning of the wedding was quiet, not rushed, not extravagant. Just still golden light slipping through the trees and the smell of cinnamon rolls Marisol insisted on baking because store-bought feels like cheating. The kitchen was alive with warmth and nervous laughter. Caleb stood by the window straightening the cuffs of his shirt, while Tommy darted past him with a clip-on tie in one hand and a juice box in the other. "You're gonna spill that?" Caleb warned, catching him with a smile. "I won't. I'm very professional today." Tommy grinned, then turned serious. "Are you nervous?" Caleb paused, then looked down at his son. "Yeah. But in a good way. The kind that reminds you something real is happening." Tommy thought for a second. "Like when you jump off the dock even though the lake's cold," exactly like that. Out back, Jonah was setting up the last of the folding chairs beneath the big oak tree, where Lorraine used to hang wind chimes. The wind had picked up just enough to set them singing again. He looked over his shoulder when he saw Caleb step outside. "You good?" Jonah asked. Caleb nodded. Better than I thought I'd be this time last year. Jonah smiled and handed him a small folded paper. Found this tucked into one of Mom's Bibles. Looks like she wrote it not long after she got back from Georgia. Thought you should read it. Caleb opened the note slowly, his eyes scanning the faded ink. If they ever find their way back to each other, my boys, I pray they learn what I couldn't say. That love doesn't hide in silence. It grows in truth, even the hard kind. And forgiveness. It's not about forgetting. It's about choosing to live free. Caleb's throat tightened. He folded the note carefully and slid it into his pocket. Thank you, he said softly. Jonah clapped a hand on his shoulder. She'd be proud of you, of both of us. The ceremony was simple. Chairs filled with neighbors, friends from church, and faces who had quietly become family. Marisol walked down the makeshift aisle in a deep cream dress, her curls loose, a soft smile on her face, like she already knew the end of the story and loved how it turned out. When she reached him, Caleb took her hands and whispered, I didn't know I could be this full. She squeezed his fingers. You were always full. You just needed somewhere to pour it. Vows came easy. Not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. After the I do, after Tommy threw flower petals like confetti and declared himself the best ring guy in history, and after the toasts and laughter and 1,000 little clinks of glasses, the sun began to set. Caleb stood by the fence, watching the light fade over the fields. Marisol joined him, leaning into his side. You think she'd be happy? He asked. Marisol looked at the land, the house, the people gathered under the strings of light. I think she'd be at peace, she said. She didn't get to finish her story, but you did something better. You rewrote the ending. Caleb nodded, eyes glassy. And it finally feels like home. She slipped her hand into his. That's because it is. As night fell and the stars blinked awake, laughter and music carried across the land Lorraine once guarded with silence. Now it was full of life, full of beginnings. And in the quiet heart of it all stood a man who had once lost everything and found more than he ever expected.